And how does this relate to languages? I mean, I'm just gonna kind of pull this up that one of the things that you also talked about in the Neuralink post, which is like, smartphones, as you mentioned with Elon Musk, that we're technically cyborgs, it's just outside of our skin, but we're still using languages to communicate with other people on WhatsApp or Facebook, or, you and I are still using English, let's say, as a language to be able to communicate with people. Did Elon Musk, or did you ever have any thoughts in terms of where languages is even going to go when it comes to the future of Neuralink, and whether it's going to be a completely different language, or are we still just going to be using English or Chinese or Mandarin or French to be able to communicate? It's just going to be a lot faster because you're not needing to type anything, or you don't need to do that in person. It's just going to be kind of one person to the other.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that's going to be very hard for people in our era to imagine. But
yeah,
and this is something I talked to Elon about a bunch about. He makes the point that language is very low res. It's very lossy. So if the example I use is if you went to a horror movie and someone asked you how it was, you could say it was terrifying, or it was scary, or maybe you don't like it and you think it was dumb or cheesy. Okay. What you actually thought, because you could see 50 movies and describe, that you might describe as cheesy, or 50 movies you might describe as terrifying. But you had a completely, nuanced, different experience in each one of them, right? And so when someone asks you how the movie was, you really have, you have 3 or 4 buckets, and maybe you describe it a little bit more. So maybe instead of having, 4 big buckets for those 4 words, maybe if you actually want to talk more about it, which takes time, now you have maybe, 20 little buckets. You can kind of get a little more nuanced for your particular reaction. But really, to do it right, you'd have to have 10,000 thimble-sized buckets. For each one is a very specific set of emotions that you are feeling. And language, what we do, because we don't want to spend all day talking about it, and we just will use one of the big buckets. We'll say, oh, you got to see the movie. No, it's terrifying. Okay. And so what's happening is that nuance, however many megabytes of data that nuance is, or kilobytes probably, that is going into something that is, one word, one bucket. And so now what I do is I'm actually handing someone the bucket that says terrifying on it. And they have to look in there, and they know all the different things that could have been put in there to match that. And they have to guess what it might be. That's it. Based on how well they know me, or what they'll probably do is assume the kind of thing that they put in there, they'll assume that that's what I'm talking about.
Right,
and that's really lossy. That's really lossy, and it's slow, right? So if I wanted to get more info across, if I wanted to get, instead of, I don't know how big it would actually be, if instead of 1 kilobyte of info across, I mean, I'm sure it would be 1 byte for a word, maybe. Instead of getting 1 byte of info across, I wanted to get 10 kilobytes across. That I might have to sit there and talk about the movie for 7 hours with you, right? So think about that. If I wanted to get 10 kilobytes out of my head, I'd have to talk to you for 7 hours. And again, I'm probably hugely overestimating what 7 hours of talking would take up, but just as an example. So that's really slow. And that's an awful data download situation. So what happens is we end up with really unnuanced conversations. The thoughts in my head are not really great at getting into your head, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And in conversations, we're going really slowly, really slow data download, really lossy, really low res. It's a bad system. So language is an incredible system if you compare it to what became before it, which was no language, no communication. The thoughts in your head are isolated into your head, right? They're quarantined in there. Language is this magical thing. I can get a thought through the air, through air pressure waves. I can create pressure waves. I can encode the thought as pressure waves in my vocal cords, send out some pressure waves that have a thought encoded into them. They go into your ear, they vibrate your eardrum, your auditory cortex interprets them, hears them, and then gets interpreted as a thought. So that's magical. But Elon's point is that, well, that's cool, but it's 100,000-year-old technology. Think about, I have another example in this post. If you brought a caveman here, how unbelievably blown away he'd be by everything. But he'd be, you know, if you were just in a field having a chat with him, he'd say, well, how do you do this? How do you, and you say, well, do we just do this? He says, well, that's what we do.
Right. What does LOL mean?
You're still doing, this is what you, right? This would be the one thing he'd be like, you haven't advanced at all here, given everything else is airplanes up there, but you're still just talking to me. So the bigger point here is that a lot of times not only is it lossy, this low res thing called language, but it actually, we start thinking in that language. It actually makes our thoughts slower and more new and less nuanced. And we're none of us are in practice with communicating much more nuanced thoughts. So we think in words, we talk in words. So if you and I both had a brain machine interface, we wouldn't, you know, maybe at first, the really low, the very first versions for the people who are not trained with them, we would be I'd literally be thinking a thought and you would hear it in your head, something like that. Or I would even simpler, I'd think words and you'd see them printed or something in front of your eyes. I don't know, something really low grade. Eventually,
you would still be thinking in English, right? If you were a person that thought in English.
At first, because I only speak English. So the people who start with this, they'll be really, really, really bad at it. But the idea eventually, I think, is you can get to a point when we are thinking, you know, if you're watching a movie, you know, even though I just said you're thinking in words, you're not always thinking in words. And you know, when you're thinking fast, if you're watching a movie, you're not thinking, you don't have a running dialogue in your head the whole time. Oh, that's cool. Oh, I wonder what she's going to do. I wonder, that he's saying that. You're not doing that, right? You're just watching and it's much more, something's happening, but it's not really words. The idea is that whatever is that kind of thing is what you can just think to someone else. And you guys can be giggling together about something that no words have been expressed, but you both are expressing the thing, you know, the emotion is being expressed and the reason for the emotion is being expressed. So again, this is the kind of thing that I can almost guarantee that people from the future, if they watch this podcast, they'll laugh thinking, okay, he knew something big was coming, but he was really bad at understanding.
He wasn't sure exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so if you see here, it's like the idea is eventually, we're cutting out. So yeah, first, if you see here in this chart here, we go from first, it's just, you know, your brain quarantine. And then we have language. So you have, well, like I described, then the red, that's the blue is language. The red is now language plus the cyborg abilities. So now we're really communicating. And eventually we cut out all of that with a brain machine interface and we just communicate. Well, it'll be fast. It'll be much faster way to communicate and to brainstorm. And when you brainstorm, it's kind of like if three people are brainstorming and they're doing it well, they can form like a super brain that's smarter than any of the three of them. And so the idea is if we can all think together, we really can form a super brain. You can have a bunch of people thinking together and solve problems that no human could solve on their own. Now, the thing, that's all fun and that's cool. But the reason Elon's doing this is because he wants us to be able to think with AI also. So with each other, but also we're thinking, you know, picture this as some Siri of the far future. And it's just like another voice in our brain. You know, you've got your limbic system arguing with your prefrontal cortex about whether you should eat that brownie or not. That's not two systems talking. It's just you feel like you're torn, right? You don't know, I just want, no, I shouldn't, you know, right? But there's two systems arguing is what's going on. So Elon thinks that the Siri of the far future will become a third system. It won't feel like you're communicating with a third thing. It'll be you're thinking.
In you.
And so now you can actually think with
fascinating.
You are Siri. That's the thing. Siri is now, because Siri is in your head, it's just like you have your limbic system, your prefrontal cortex, and you have your super advanced AI, and all three of them are now one big system inside your head. And you have AI and right now the best way we can communicate with AI is with our voice or with texting with two thumbs. It's super low bandwidth.
Yeah.
Brain machine interfaces, once we get good at this, and it maybe it's the people born now, maybe it's people born 20 years from now that really are good at it. But when they're good at it, they will be AI. They will be able to think with AI. They'll have AI capabilities. And that's when he thinks when everyone has AI, or a lot of people, many people have AI in their heads, it's hard for AI itself to get out of control and hurt us because we're all armed with it. And so he says, you know, he would prefer that there's no Superman on the planet. But if you're going to have one Superman, you want to have a billion Supermen. Because that now, you know, one is scary. if only these big companies have access to AI, or one certain person, or the AI itself gets out of control, that's scary. But if we're just armed with it, and now AI is not really, it's met its match all over the place, he thinks that's a safer future.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you touched on, communication, is so fascinating, right? Because there's like layers of how much you can read on someone, and miscommunication is like the age-old story of how people communicate in relationships and business, whatever. And like texting is like probably the most menial thing, where you don't really know, like someone says they're okay or someone says they're terrified, like without a punctuation, you might be a different thing, or emoji, it's a different thing. And then audio, you can tell by the voice tone. Video, we can kind of tell by being here. But with something like Neuralink, I imagine the biometrics could also be involved, where if someone is communicating something to you just by how fast their heartbeat is beating, or maybe how much they're sweating, or whatever it might be that's happening around their body, like that's something that could be communicated along with
look,
a message.
So how about you go to the doctor, and instead of them touching your wrist and, if you hurt your wrist, does this hurt? Does this hurt? Does this hurt? They can just immediately feel what you're feeling. And they can say, oh, okay. Right. How about your emotion? You're trying to communicate with your partner, and you let them feel the emotion in you. And you can, and they can say, oh my God, like that's what your depression feels like. Oh, I understand it so much better now. Right. You go to a therapist, and they can, the therapist can say, okay, let me tap into what you're feeling. And they can tap in while they're talking to you, and they can come back out and say, oh, wow. Okay. So look, here's what I think is going on. Right. I mean, you can actually, an emotion is just something magical about an emotion. It is a physiological process that's going on. And with the physiological process, just like sound doesn't have to actually have chemicals, just like sound, you don't need actual sound in the air to make your brain think there's sound. You don't need actual chemicals going through your brain to make the brain experience what it would be experiencing if there were. So someone else could, the brain machine interface electrodes stimulate neurons in a way that mimic the emotional experience I'm having. And then they can turn it right off. And by the way, of course, now this gets to, we can start to help control our own emotions. If I'm feeling, I can, right now on my phone, I have we have if it gets too loud, I can set a sound limit on my phone to protect my hearing, right? Don't go above this sound. You can start to be like, don't go above this anger level. So I go on my phone, I open the emotions app, and I go to anger, and I say, cap it here, or cap my hunger here right now. Or, I'm going out to really good dinner tonight. Let's get really hungry. Right. This all sounds nuts. And again, so many people, this is, we talk about progressive and conservative. It doesn't just apply to politics. If you want to know who's progressive and conservative in other ways, see how they react to this. Some people are super excited. They're saying, this is amazing. It's confusing, but I want to get me in there. And other people are saying, what? Never, no way. I don't like it. That's a conservative impulse. Right. So, I noticed just by talking to people, you hear all kinds of different reactions, and there's nothing wrong with either of those impulses. This is a totally new, scary thing, but it's just interesting. You learn something about yourself with how you react to something mind-blowing like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not right or wrong, but I mean, I would imagine with how powerful something like this could be, like the people that really knew how to use the internet and Google, or even just the latest social media, whatever it is that we want to be adopting that has high potential to be useful, those people are generally the ones that are going to get ahead. And I imagine the people that are going to be more progressive are the ones that are going to be more excited about this. They're going to take advantage of the opportunity.
Early adopters, and not even early, but just the people who can adapt to very quickly changing things, which gets harder as you get older. That's why young people will have an advantage. That's what they always do with technology. But I know some 75-year-olds who are unbelievable at technology, right? Because it's mostly an attitude thing. If you're curious and excited about it, you'll never get bad at it. It's when you start checking out and it takes more effort maybe to stay, a 10-year-old is going to be great at any technology that comes into her hands, because we're just, we are at that age, very plastic and very adaptable. And as we get older, it gets harder. It's like training a dog, right? So so I think it's going to be a bigger and bigger advantage. It's going to be a more and more important skill to have, to not be outdated with technology. Maybe 50 years ago, okay, that the old person I don't know how to turn on the TV. big deal, right? I mean, today it's like, well, the old people who are good with tech are probably in closer touch with their family. They FaceTime and stuff, right? And maybe they were enjoying their iPad, and that's actually they can listen to audiobooks when they're, you know, when their site goes or whatever. It's actually a bigger deal. I think it's going to become a bigger and bigger crutch to be like either an anti-tech person, someone who doesn't like new tech, a Luddite type. You know, my sister's like this. She was, you know, can't stand the iPhone, smartphones until, of course, eventually she gets one. You know, she's always does it. She just does it like 8 years late with a bunch of resistance. And so it's those people, I think they'll be fine. And getting ahead isn't everything. And some people, they'll just won't care. Sure. Like I'm not going to be an entrepreneur in this very particular kind of world because I don't know how to use the thing. But I think it's a good time to maybe kind of reflect on how you feel about future tech and understand it's coming, whether you like it or not. And maybe try to see the best in it, because it's not that it's necessarily great. It might be really bad. It might be a disaster, but it's coming. And so let's try to engage with it.